us pray. At the beginning of this week, we ask you, Father, to renew and strengthen us the awareness of our duty and privilege as members of this legislature. We ask you also in your divine providence to bless and protect the Assembly and the province we are elected to serve. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
I would like to present this petition of 1,046 names petitioning the Government of Alberta to build a multi-level care facility in La Crete.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 30, to amend the Municipal Taxation Act, a request that the municipalities of this province have been asking for some time, Mr. Speaker, which allows them to have the authority of designating what is and what isn't farmland within their boundaries.
The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon has moved for first reading Bill number 277, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act. Those in favour of giving this consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill 277, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Taylor, is now read a first time.
Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, being Bill PR 25, and being the Security Home Trust Company Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to incorporate this trust company, establish its capitalization, and provide the usual powers of a body corporate.
The honourable member for Calgary North Hill has moved first reading of Bill number PR 25, Security Home Trust Company Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
Bill number PR 25, Security Home Trust Company Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Stewart, is now read a first time.
Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being PR 26 and being the Fair and Milliken Insurance Company Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is similar to that which I have described.
The honourable member for Calgary North 26, Fair and Milliken Insurance Company Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 26, Fair and Milliken Insurance Company Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Stewart, is now read a first time.
Member for Stony Plain.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, PR 27, to the Hermo T. Pagtakan Bar Admission Act, a bill presented for the admission of Mr. Pagtakan to the Alberta Bar.
The honourable member for Stony Plain has moved for first reading Bill number PR 27, Hermo T. Pagtakan Bar Admission Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, please say aye. Please say no. Motion is carried.
Bill number PR 27, Hermo T. Patagon Bar Admission Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Herron, is now read a first time. Concerns and reports.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the 14th annual report of the Alberta Law Foundation.
Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the report called Post-Secondary Operating Grants in Alberta, an equity study by Dr. J. Stephen Dupre. I've arranged to have copies made available for all honourable members.
Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table this afternoon for the information of all members a copy of the wording of a petition that was signed by 650 students at the University of Lethbridge inviting the minister to stay at the residence and familiarize himself with the problems of students there.
Tabling.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Lethbridge West, followed by Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and to members of the House some very special guests of the Assembly seated in your gallery today. And Mr. Speaker, they are the winners of the annual bursary awards presented by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Alberta Branch. These bursaries are presented annually by the Alberta Branch, and as honourable members know, all members of this House constitute the membership of the branch. The purpose of the bursaries, Mr. Speaker, is to increase interest in Parliament among young Albertans. Each year, 2 recipients are nominated, one from the Alberta All-Girls Parliament and one from the Texas Parliament. Nominations are made by the Parliament with whom the candidate is associated, and each bursary for $1,000 is presented along with a commemorative framed scroll. This year, Mr. Speaker, the bursaries will be presented to Ms. Sarah Baker of Calgary and Ms. Alice Mueller of Lacombe, co-winners of the Alberta All-Girls Parliament, and to Mr. David Green of Edmonton, who represents Texas. Mr. Speaker, I would ask these people to rise in the gallery as I read their name. We have Ms. Sarah Baker and her father, Mr. John Baker, Ms. Dallas Mueller and her father, Mr. Phil Mueller, Mr. David Green and his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Les Click. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we have Ms. Marilyn McGivern of the All-Girls Parliament, and not with us today, Mr. Speaker, but with us in spirit is Mr. David Marriott, the Crown Counsel in Lacombe. These 2 last people, Mr. Speaker, work extremely hard to encourage the involvement of these young people. And as a former Lieutenant Governor of Texas Parliament, I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, having heard the debates, that amongst these winners are future members of this Assembly and who knows, maybe a future Parliament. Would the honourable members of the House join with me in welcoming these special people to the House?
Minister of Advanced Education, followed by the member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Mill Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the House the author of the report I just tabled today, Dr. Stephen Dupre. He's served as a chairman or member of approximately a dozen federal or provincial commissions, inquiries, and task forces, and was the founding chairman of the Ontario Council on University Affairs. He's been a member of the National Research Council and of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. He's a past president of the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, a recipient of the Institute's Vanier Medal, and an officer of the Order of Canada. He's just completed a very extensive and important study for Albertans on post-secondary financing, and I'd ask members to extend our visitor a warm welcome.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 31 grade 6 students from Lee Ridge School. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Olga Severin, and parent, Mrs. Sonia Klock. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and to the other members of the House this afternoon Mr. Sven Robinson, the MP for Burnaby, who is sitting in your gallery today. He's in town to address a meeting this evening to discuss with interested citizens his observations of a recent trip to Chile. I'd ask him to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Leader of the Opposition, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and members of the Assembly some 28 students from the Eastwood Junior High in the riding of Edmonton-Norwood, Mr. Speaker. I've been to this school many times, and I assure you it's a first-rate school, and there's a lot of pride among both the students and the staff in that school. They are accompanied, Mr. Speaker, by their teachers, Miss Sylvia Crow, Mr. Dave Tomaszewski, and Mr. Jonathan Reich. Mr. Speaker, they're seated in the public gallery. I would ask them to stand and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce a group of 17 Albertans who have driven over 10 hours to come to the legislature to be with us today. They represent the Concerned Citizens Group of Lacrete and are here to present their case for a multi-level hospital in Lacrete. I would ask that they please rise and receive the warm welcome of the members of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care. Mr. Speaker, throughout Alberta, there are many hundreds of long-term care patients who are trapped in acute care hospital beds. Mr. Speaker, most of these people are seniors, and they reflect the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the government has not planned the system properly and has failed in its responsibility to provide long-term care facilities. Mr. Speaker, at the Alberta Hospitals Association Convention, the minister announced that he was basically going to punish the victims, Mr. Speaker, and effective on January the 1st, patients in active treatment hospitals would be assessed, if they were assessed that they could be in auxiliary care, it was going to start to cost them $14. My question, Mr. Speaker, to this minister, will the minister explain why, instead of dealing with the obvious causes of the problem, he's decided to put a fine on senior citizens of this province?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has a number of his facts mixed up pretty badly. This province has more beds for senior citizens for long-term care than any province in Canada, including some very fine auxiliary hospital and nursing home facilities throughout the entire province. Many of them located in smaller communities, which have been struggling hard to make sure that they keep those facilities in the face of the opposition that comes both from the Leader of the Opposition and from the Leader of the Liberal Party. But we keep trying. The facts of the matter are that the numbers of people who are in active treatment hospital beds in Alberta who've been assessed for auxiliary care are lower now than they were a year ago. We hope within the next year and a half to bring on another close to 300 beds in Edmonton, which will reduce the numbers that are waiting for auxiliary beds in this city to almost zero. In the meantime, there are a number of seniors who are drawing pensions, are occupying active treatment hospital beds, and paying nothing for long-term care in active treatment hospital beds. It's been proposed to us by active treatment hospital boards and others that it ought to be reasonable that if those people have been assessed for long-term care, are receiving pensions, that they should pay the same amount for occupying an active treatment hospital bed, if they've been assessed for auxiliary care, as they would if they were in an auxiliary bed. And that is exactly what's happening. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, unfair about a situation like that. As a matter of fact, it was unfair.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. There should be probably one or two more supplementaries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would remind this minister that these people are not in acute care hospitals because they want to be, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, they're not checking in for rest and relaxation, Mr. Speaker. My question is, Why doesn't the government change its policy rather than charge these people unnecessary fines, Mr. Speaker? It's not their fault. Why do this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition doesn't know what he's talking about. The facts of the matter are that these seniors have been assessed as requiring long-term care, either auxiliary hospital or nursing home care. Now, what the active treatment hospitals can do with them, and do in a lot of provinces, is simply check them out of the hospital, and then they are left on their own if there are no auxiliary hospital beds. In our case, we've decided to utilize surplus active treatment hospital beds that exist in this province to house seniors who've been assessed for long-term auxiliary or nursing home care. And all that we are saying is they will pay no more, no less than if we did have an auxiliary hospital bed or a nursing home bed. Now, there's got to be something wrong with the Honourable Leader's figuring if he believes there's something unfair about that. It would be unfair to have people in active treatment beds for months on end paying nothing, while people across the street or in an adjoining facility paid $14 a day in an auxiliary bed.
Speaker, if this minister would listen, we'd ask the question. There is a surplus in Edmonton of over 361 beds. They have no place to go, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality. And I say to this minister, why don't you get on building these long-term beds instead of punishing the people that are there that have no alternative, Mr. Speaker?
Again, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is completely mixed up. The people have a place to go. They are staying in active treatment hospitals. And if they were not staying in active treatment hospitals and we had an auxiliary hospital bed for them, they would be paying $14 a day after 60 days. And that's all we are asking them to pay in the active treatment hospital. In the meantime, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, knows full well that we've taken some very aggressive steps in terms of developing new facilities for senior citizens who've been assessed for auxiliary hospital care and nursing home care. The decision we made with respect to the Edmonton General Hospital becoming a full full auxiliary hospital in addition to the geriatric care centre there next April after the Millwoods Hospital opens is one that will bring on about 300 new beds in this city alone. You add to that the beds have been approved for the Alan Gray Auxiliary Hospital in the Chinese community. You've got over 400 beds coming on stream within the next 2 years. That will resolve the problem. In the meantime, we're not turfing seniors out in the cold as the NDP might do to avoid them. Well, what would you do if you didn't have any facilities?
Order, please, Honourable Minister. Unfortunately, you don't get a chance to ask the question across the floor. Final supplementary, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, people are well aware, Mr. Speaker, that this government is punishing seniors for their mismanagement.
That's right. That's
Mr. Speaker, and I would point out these particular citizens that are in acute care hospitals have to maintain their own residence because they never know if they're going to be there on a day-to-day basis or when they're going to be discharged. Does the minister not fail to recognize that they often have to maintain another residence and possibly cannot afford to pay this fine that the minister is putting on them?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, it should be made abundantly clear that this government has the best programs in place for senior citizens of any government in Canada. You can look at our programs under Aids to Daily Living and other areas where we provide significantly greater benefits. I recall, Mr. Speaker, a year ago when we increased the per diem rate in auxiliary hospitals from $10 to $14 a day, we had comparisons with every other province in Canada, and we were the lowest of any in that area. Now, I don't know what else we can do to ensure that these people have adequate care. We're doing, I think, a very good job.
Okay. Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Calgary Glenmore, followed by Clover Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we may be saving money, but we're doing it on the backs of helpless people. Mr. Speaker, I want to know, is this a long-term plan in disguise to force acute care hospitals to change their bed use without any additional funds to adapt their facilities?
I think I've already answered that question, Mr. Speaker.
Glenmore, followed by Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, Is the minister evaluating methods of discharging these seniors in acute care hospitals and in long-term care facilities to their own homes, and perhaps reassessing the type of care with rehabilitation programs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do have a pilot program going on right now that's attempting to develop ways in which we can classify patients so that we can have them in the right kinds of facilities. And in many cases, I think we could move seniors from nursing homes or avoid them going into nursing homes and provide them with home nursing care, homemaker care, and if we did perhaps a better job of distributing the number of seniors that are involved between those kinds of services, we may not have as many inactive treatment hospitals as we have today.
It's not a new signal.
Supplementary question to the Minister. Last spring, the Minister indicated to the Assembly that there be a review and some action taken on converting active treatment beds in the rural areas to long-term care. Can the Minister indicate what has happened to that program?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, what we did is we wrote to every hospital board in the province, including the urban ones, and invited them to assess the need for active treatment beds and to advise us if they wish to convert some of their active treatment beds to auxiliary beds in multiples of 5. We felt that any fewer than 5 would not be able to provide the appropriate auxiliary level of care. We've had a considerable amount of interest in doing that from some hospitals. Thus far, I believe there's about 2 or 3 that have actually applied, and the conversion is underway or under planning. But I hope there are some more, particularly some of the smaller hospitals who have fewer active treatment beds occupied than they have actually in operation that would make application. So far, it's been a slower response than we had anticipated, but hopefully it will come.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture, no one questions the importance of the United States market for the continued health of our red meat industry. If there was one positive thing the Mulrooney trade deal was supposed to accomplish, it was to guarantee my neighbors and other Alberta farmers and ranchers access to the United States market. But this deal does no such thing, Mr. Speaker. Existing countervail duties remain in place, and Alberta red meat producers will still be subject to the harassment of United States protectionists. Will the minister admit today that the Conservative clearly failed to achieve this long-promised guarantee of secure access to the United States, and that Alberta producers will still be vulnerable to United States countervail duties in the future?
Perhaps one question's enough.
Mr. Speaker, may I indicate at the outset that I'm delighted that the cattle producers themselves have endorsed the agreement because they recognize the positive impact that it will have on their specific industry. I also should share with the honourable member that that is the purpose for the 5-year examination period whereby we can look at each other's rules and regulations and legislation as it relates to the industry so that hopefully we can do away with a number of the irritants that do exist.
The minister still clearly didn't answer the question. Now, given that the binational panel will clearly not prevent the United States from slapping Alberta with anti-dumping and countervail duties almost at will, how can the minister pretend that this ineffective binational mechanism will result in any guaranteed access?
Mr. Speaker, we're very confident that with this agreement it is going to include increased access, as the honourable member has indicated. And as I reinforced when I responded to him with his initial question, we are going to go through a period of reevaluation as it relates to the specific legislation, rules and regulation that do pertain to the industries on both sides so that we will have an opportunity for input to remove whatever irritants might exist.
Then the minister does admit that we have no guaranteed access, and I guess I would like to ask the minister, does the minister not agree with Dr. Joe Rosario, the executive director of his own department, Trade Policy Secretariat, and I quote, "A more rigorous dispute settlement mechanism was preferred by your department." How are you going to answer that to Alberta farmers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that they brought the issue up and reinforced again what the honourable member for Bakerville had brought up as it related to a comment by Dr. Rosario, because here I have a written statement from Dr. Rosario disputing what the member for Bakerville originally had said, and again disputing what this honourable member is attempting to convey, because again they are inaccuracies. Mr. Speaker, I regret that I guess they don't wish to hear the answer. If they wish, I'm more than happy to share it with them. But I should indicate, Mr. Speaker, that Dr. Rosario indicated that the mechanism that is in place now, if we do go ahead with this agreement, is much superior to what we presently have. They conveniently forgot to leave the end of his statement off.
I hope the minister files that statement from his executive director. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary, will the minister at least inform us what specific clause under the Mulroney trade deal removes the 4.4 cents a pound countervailing duty on Canadian live hog export? Can the minister at least clarify us on that very important point?
Well, I'm happy to clarify for the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy that as Minister of Agriculture I can speak out so forcefully on behalf of our producers, whereby when the trade hearings were held in Edmonton, the Alberta pork producers attended the All-Parliamentary Standing Committee and endorsed this agreement, contrary to what the honourable members opposite are conveying.
Chair recognizes Stettler, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the interests of the red meat industry and the giant step that has been taken with this trade agreement, I wonder if the minister could inform the House just what percentage of red meat in Alberta goes to markets outside of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to share that information with the honourable member. We only consume 23% of what we produce in this province. Again, that underscores that the importance of this agreement. We have to make sure we have access to other markets. We export from our province approximately 77% of our beef. And if I can put in one last comment as it relates to this agreement too, Mr. Speaker, I think it's noteworthy. Prior to the initialing of the agreement, that the members from the New Democratic Party were indicating we're going to do away with the supply managed sectors. They were saying we're going to do away with a number of things. We protected those sectors just as we're protecting access to the United States market.
Westlock Sturgeon,
Mr.
supplementary.
Speaker, thank you. Maybe a giant step for the Tory party, but it was a pretty small step for ranchers in this province. Would the Minister of Agriculture inform us as to whether or not that the tribunal that decides on a countervail, Americans can countervail or beef, whether the decision coming from that tribunal is binding in any way on the Americans? Is the decision from the tribunal binding in any way on the Americans?
Of course. Mr. Speaker, what I would do, since we have a minister that has been very involved in the discussions, I would refer it to the Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, who has been more instrumental in the putting together of this document than myself.
The X-lax is stuck in your throat.
Mr. Speaker, just a brief comment that the member for Westlock Sturgeon is useful for keeping the NDP happy with their laughter. Every riposte achieves the desired results from his friends on his left. The answer is yes.
Main question, Leader of the Liberals.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to continue the questions along the free trade line, but direct them to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, there is, without any preamble, I'll get in because I think I'm after information that the guide and outfitters licenses, for instance, Mr. Speaker, are granted now with a requirement that they cannot be transferred out to an American. Will, under the new Free Trade Act, will guide and outfitters licenses be available to Americans? Will they be able to be sold to Americans?
Mr. Speaker, I'd refer that matter to our Minister of Lands and Forests, but Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Mr. Speaker, I don't recall that it ever came up in any of our discussions. The Minister may have been faced with it.
Mr. Speaker, further information, we have, as Mr. Premier is well aware, the SBEC, or the Small Business Equity Corporation, and VENCAP operating in the province. Under the Free Trade Agreement, will these organizations be able to continue to operate, give capital to small Alberta companies?
They don't appear to be related in terms of questions, but the answer is yes.
Mr. Speaker, no, the relationship is all as to what we can do under the Free Trade Pact. I thought I was making that fairly clear. If they can continue, Mr. Speaker, could the Premier tell us if these organizations can continue, will they then, does that mean then that they will then be loaning to or financing small American companies that come up here? In other words, will our Alberta taxpayers' money be used to subsidize American corporations moving in here?
Mr. Speaker, these companies are not subsidizing anybody. They're investing.
Mr. Speaker, another area, this again is to do with the Free Trade Pact. Prior to the Free Trade Pact, as you know, the Americans called royalties and timber bottom loading in British Columbia as far as Cedar Shakes are concerned. Has the Premier made any effort to make sure that the sliding scale oil and gas royalty system we use, Mr. Speaker, will not be considered, as was the royalty for Cedar Shakes, some form of bottom loading for our oil and gas industry?
Mr. Speaker, there will be absolutely no impact on the government's royalty system.
Member for Stony Plain, supplementary.
A supplementary question for the Premier. Given that opponents to the Free Trade Agreement have argued that foreign investment is bad for Alberta and Canada, and that freer access to capital markets will harm our financial institutions, I'd like to ask the Premier if he is familiar with a very positive preliminary assessment recently released by Canada's largest financial institution, that is the Royal Bank of Canada.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and not just the Royal Bank of Canada, but it is true that they have very strongly endorsed the trade arrangement. But most thoughtful organizations, businesses in Canada have also endorsed the trade arrangement. And I must say that we will have, from a provincial outlook, an ability to attract investment from south and will not be as captive to the markets from eastern Canada.
The Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Advanced Education, and they're with regards to the report tabled today, the Dupre report, specifically pages 104 to 109, referring to the University of Lethbridge. Mr. Dupre notes that the university's current operating grant may be below the level it might have obtained under applicable granting rules. And he also goes on to note that both the university and the Department of Advanced Education failed to pursue a funding initiative to pay for program developments involving the School of Fine Arts. To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, could the Minister indicate whether the Department and the Minister is prepared to pursue that recommendation and undertake negotiations with the University of Lethbridge to provide program grants in that area of fine arts?
Mr. Speaker, the question that the honourable member has raised is an important one in that it deals with a policy issue that is not strictly financial in its targeting. The Dupre report essentially deals with alleged funding inequities in the system. but Dr. Dupre discovered some other policy matters that he's recommending we pursue, and that one, as a matter of fact, is underway today. The presidents were all in the city today to receive their copies of the report and go over it with us. And the president of the University of Lethbridge has started his negotiations with the department today.
Mr. Speaker, certainly compliment the minister for that. In terms of other areas of the report, Mr. Dupre noted that there's a lack of diversity in the third and fourth year courses at the University of Lethbridge, and that there may be a need for adjusting of the operating revenues to the university. Could the minister indicate the government's position with regards to that recommendation and whether that is one being pursued in terms of adjustments as well?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to say that the government recognizes the University of Lethbridge as a very important institution in the post-secondary system. And we've recognized for some time the struggles they have had relating to internal administration and their self-governance, their financing and programming, enrollment, and the state of their building. Otherwise, things aren't bad down there. But we're making moves to try and address all of those problems.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, Mr. Dupre states that there is a need for the enrollment situation at the U of L to be reconsidered to see if special funding requirements must continue or whether the U of L can be financially viable on its own. Could the minister indicate which direction the government would take at this time, as in terms of a policy decision or directive in that matter?
Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to answer that question because I don't want to prejudge the issues at hand, but the glaring problem is the low enrollment in third and fourth years, which is quite out of balance with the enrollment in first and second years. And we intend to give priority to addressing that problem. The funding system that the government uses, of course, would be adjusted to reflect any solution that's arrived at.
Speaker, final supplementary. It's with regards to the special mandate that the University of Lethbridge had in its original design, and which was discussed quite thoroughly in this legislature on the resolution by the honourable member from Lethbridge West. Could the minister indicate whether that original mandate provided to the University of Lethbridge still holds, and it's in the intent of the government to follow through on that mandate?
I think it's fair to review the mandate to see if it's still applicable today. As far as I know, it is, but all the parties that are concerned are open-minded, and the objective is to make the University of Lethbridge the third strong university in the province.
Supplementaries, looking at Edmonton Millwoods, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, given that Dr. Dupre has identified several areas of inequity among the institutions in the province and has recommended specific allocations that should be adjusted, can the minister advise us today how long it's going to take before we see some action on these recommendations?
Well, as I indicated to the earlier question, Mr. Speaker, action has started with respect to the University of Lethbridge today. Insofar as financial inequities that have been identified, to put it into context, out of annual operating grants around the $800 million mark per annum, Dr. Dupre identified some inequities that total $4 million, which includes a special research support grant of $1 million for the University of Calgary. So in a system that is as volatile and changing with respect to enrollments and new programming, etc., to come within $3 million in an $800 million budget, I think has been quite good on the part of the system. Notwithstanding that, the inequities that he has identified are important to the institutions that are involved. and I intend to pursue those matters with my colleagues immediately.
Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, Dr. Dupre in his study indicated that the shortfall with respect to fine art funding, which he described as likely substantial, goes back to at least 1982, and I'm wondering whether the minister would undertake to ensure that rectification of the situation covers these past years, and that such rectification will be forthwith as recommended by Dr. Dupre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no way, of course, that anyone would commit retroactivity with respect to any of these inequities or faults. The idea is to go forward on a system that we believe is fair and equitable, and we will be doing that. And if there are corrections to be made, they'll be made at the earliest opportunity.
Member for Lethbridge West, final supplementary this issue.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister. Insofar as I believe the Government of Alberta earnestly encouraged the University of Lethbridge to launch the nursing program, the graduate nursing program for registered nurses, would the Minister advise the Assembly whether it's still the intent of this government to ensure and encourage the continuation of the nursing program at the University of Lethbridge?
Move your resolution whenever you want.
Mr. Speaker, I think I can't answer that question today because we're just getting into it, but I believe it's fair to say that if a program is needed, it will be supported and funded adequately. We're presently introducing an aspect of rationalization into the system and propose to phase out unnecessary duplication or destructive competition in the system.
Calgary Northwest, followed by Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. In May of 1987, the Minister announced the Employment Alternative Program. Could the Minister inform the House how many unemployed Albertans have found work through this program?
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Alternatives Program was launched about 6 months ago, and as honourable members will recall, the program was targeted at social assistance recipients in the employables category and people whose unemployment insurance had run out. The most recent figures I have, Mr. Speaker, are to the middle of November, and it has been indicated that 4,000 individuals within those two categories are now working under the program.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister assure the House that adequate safeguards are in place to ensure against fraudulent abuse of the program by employers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we on a regular basis are challenged with monitoring all of our programs. Obviously, when we have points of contact with in excess of 500,000 people through a year through our career centers and all of our programs, it is very important that we do monitor particularly the job creation and the training programs. It's determined that less than 1% of our programs, Mr. Speaker, are subject to any kind of abuse, and generally it has to do with a lack of understanding of the program. There's misinformation, miscommunication between the employee, the business, the trainee, or the department. With regard to the Employment Alternatives Program, we have not detected any abuse, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the program had a minimum criterion of 30 weeks. That is, the employers had to participate for a minimum of 30 weeks, and the average is 51 weeks. And certainly the fact that the wage subsidy under the program is averaging in excess of $6.20 an hour, I think, is indicative that there's no intention to abuse this program. It's the business community working together with the government to help the disadvantaged in this province.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Another supplementary is the Minister reached an agreement with the federal government to provide additional funding to the program through the Canadian Job Strategy.
Mr. Speaker, we negotiated a four-cornered agreement. That is an agreement with Health and Welfare Canada, Canada Employment Integration, Department of Social Services, and my department, Career Development and Employment, to be sure that we fell within the guidelines of the federal government's responsibilities and our joint responsibilities in dealing with people on social assistance. We have in fact used up funds, provincial government funds, at a much more rapid pace than we had anticipated, and I think that's to the credit of the business community who took up the challenge in this connection. The federal government had targeted some $6 million, Mr. Speaker, to address social assistance recipients in the employables category. It is my understanding that their programs have not experienced the same rapid take-up as ours, and I will be discussing with my federal colleagues the possibility of them designating some of their dollars from their social assistance employables category programs to our area of the Employment Alternatives Program.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given the great utilization of the program by both the employer and the job seeker, will the provincial government be making available more funds for the program to provide increased job opportunities for unemployed Albertans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess that becomes the most important question. Obviously, when we have a program that has expended funds at basically twice the speed that we anticipated, we are now examining ways in which we can enhance dollars for that particular program. I also believe that because it is such an important program, because I believe we are on the leading edge of dealing with people, the employables, on social assistance in terms of assimilating them into the labor force, I believe it's very important that we step back and have a very good look at the program, assess the positives and negatives, gives us a chance to do some evaluation, and then possibly move back into the program. We'll be making that decision in the very near future, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all honourable members that I will be here following the Provincial Treasurer's address, arguing for my colleagues in this legislature to support further funding under that program.
Edmonton Belmont, followed by Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the monitoring of the program, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister can advise the members of the Assembly how many on-site inspections have been made to businesses that are utilizing the program just to ensure that the system is not being abused. How many on-site inspections have been made?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the best use of the resources, the manpower of the Department of Career Development and Employment is to go out and inspect sites. If we have 4,000 people working in the program, it'd be virtually impossible to visit every site because the average number of people working for each business is about one person per company. So therefore, it becomes a very difficult challenge for us to monitor. If we had a situation where companies were taking up 20 and 30 people at a time, it would be much easier to follow up on, Mr. Speaker. But I can assure the honourable member, as we do in all of our programs, we do follow-ups with the employee and the employer to make sure that there is no abuse. And Mr. Speaker, whenever there is an abuse, I can assure you that it comes to our attention and we move very swiftly to rectify that particular situation.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, in spite of the glowing terminology, we've now been informed we have a 35% dropout, and we need to know why that's happening. Would the Minister inform the House then what ongoing research is being done regarding that dropout, the causes, the characteristics, the support available to users, employee input, employer input, and so on?
First, Mr. Speaker, I'd recommend that the honourable member doesn't go to the newspaper to do her research. I'd certainly be pleased to provide her with any information that she requires to make an evaluation. I can tell you that the dropout rate is substantially less than 35%. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I've had a conversation with the reporter that reported 35% and pointed out to her that the statistic she was using has got nothing to do with the retention rate in the program. So, but if the honourable member has a legitimate interest, I'd be provide to give her the details. I don't have them at my fingertips at this particular point, but I can assure you that it's substantially less than 35%.
Edmonton Highlands, followed by Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Cypress Redcliffe, Edmonton Strathcona, Owens Didsbury, Stettler, Wainwright. Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand that last Thursday the Public Affairs Bureau sent some 25 public relations officers from Edmonton to Calgary to tour the Olympic site and did so on the government aircraft. I wonder if the Deputy Premier is prepared to explain to the Assembly why it is in this time when people programs like education, health care, social services are being cut back, why it is that this type of government expenditure was necessary.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I missed the first part of the question, and I'm unable, from what I heard, to connect it to my responsibility.
I'll gladly repeat the question, Mr. Speaker. I was asking the Deputy Premier if he would explain why, when other programs, people programs, are being cut, his department, the Public Affairs Bureau, decided it was important to send these people to Calgary to tour the Olympic sites.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be glad to look up the details of that trip and report back to the honourable member.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Will the Deputy Premier also confirm that it's the Public Affairs Bureau intention to establish and promote, quote, the government's presence at the Olympics by setting up a special office starting in January, not even in a government building, in order to do this, instead of using established Alberta tourism offices?
You bet it is, Mr. Speaker. We're going to tell the Alberta story to the Olympic visitors in a way that's really positive and effective.
That's good. It's a conservative nightmare. They work
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure they are, and I just wonder how much it's going to cost. Can the Minister explain why it is that the former Managing Director of the Public Affairs Bureau, now on contract to do this special promotions project, is submitting and getting paid $175 a crack just to draft a letter?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I'll have to look up the details of whatever it is the honourable member is referring to. If she's referring to services tendered by the firm of Frank Calder, who's now out there in the private sector, he's competing along with any number of other private firms.
$5 a letter. He's doing
Privatize yourself for fun and profit with the Alberta government. New government motto. Mr. Speaker, well, the Minister has avoided answering one of the important questions, so can he tell us just how many $175 letters he's prepared to buy on behalf of the promoting the Alberta government, and how much this whole project is going to cost Alberta taxpayers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member wants details of the Olympics communications program, we'd be pleased to provide them. I doubt very much if the government is paying somebody $175 to write a letter. These consulting firms are like any other number of private sector firms. You pay for the services on a time basis or on a specific contract item by item basis, but to go at it in the method we are makes it pretty difficult to handle. But there is a special communications budget for what I think is going to be a really positive and unique opportunity for Alberta to tell its story.
Supplementary question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, probably the Deputy Premier could save himself some money in the black eye the province is getting by just trying to solve the Lubicon problem. But the question...
to do with the topic. This is a supplement. Order, please. Order. The Chair, if the Chair's memory doesn't fail entirely, realize that on Thursday and Friday there were certain complaints from parts of the House, including Westlock Sturgeon, about succinct supplementaries as well as the length of answers. So the supplementary question, please.
Mr. Speaker, I was proceeding full speed ahead until you stopped me. But, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, or to the Deputy Premier, after he's just bailed himself out of that one, was to ask him whether or not he's devoting some money to trying to inform the people that are coming for the Olympics that there are other attractions in Alberta that they could take in while they're here? What the advertising I've seen has all been on Olympics. What is he doing to try to encourage people to get out around the province to other attractions we have in this province?
Mr. Speaker, there are two elements to what we're talking about, and that kind of program, of course, is carried on a year-round basis by our Department of Tourism. But the package I was describing to the honourable member from Highlands is aimed specifically at a unique group of visitors that will never be assembled in Alberta again. Top decision-making executives of prime corporations from all over the world. Their companies are bringing them in here to enjoy Alberta for a few days, and we want to give them a message to take home with them. Now that's pretty positive, and I realize the socialists don't like doing that, but we're going to do it.
Supplementary Calgary North Hill.
Supplemental to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Can the Minister...
Chair's having trouble hearing. Calgary North Hill, please.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Economic Development and Trade advise the Assembly of what steps his department will be taking to promote the Business Opportunity Centre during the Olympics?
Mr. Speaker, we're working very closely with the Olympic Secretariat because, as the Deputy Premier indicated to the members of the Assembly, there will be a tremendous number of visitors from throughout the world visiting southern Alberta and other parts of Alberta during this exciting period in February. And so we're working with a private sector group of business people in Alberta to try and match Alberta business people with the visitors who are coming in order that there may be an opportunity to enhance economic development in Alberta. I'm sure all members of the Assembly would support that part of the activity, in addition to enjoying the events that will take place in February.
Do the reps have any